Hello, everyone. It's so exciting to have this amazing guest today, Polly. Thank you so much for doing this session. We've been planning this for some time. And Polly Helen has been an amazing promoter of a CEO of Career Boost and helping product managers out there to learn more about how to lead projects and manage projects in AI. Polly, if you can tell us more about it, please.
Thank you. Thanks. And thanks so much for having me, Vicky. I know we've been talking a long time about doing this. I'm a big fan of the show. Fantastic. Yeah. So my background was in tech before I switched to product about 10 years ago. And then my most recent stint in industry, I was at Amazon at Alexa. I actually launched the very first generative AI answers on Alexa back in 2020 before it was still cool, but it wasn't as cool as it is today. It was the first time we didn't really know what Alexa was going to say necessarily and had to do a lot of internal alignment on what's safe and what's not, along with just new things like picking out new metrics to figure out what was going to be the launch criteria and how we're going to monitor this thing and what's safe and what's not. So that was really exciting. I left Amazon in 2022 really because I saw that I felt like a lot more people needed to get into AI careers, especially more of a diversity, right?
Yeah.
We have kind of a monoculture in AI, and there's a lot of like tech keeping, gatekeeping around like jobs that aren't necessarily tech. So product and marketing and like assuming these people need to have PhDs or, engineering backgrounds when really like I come from that background and that wasn't the most useful thing at all for being able to successfully lead projects like this, right? So I founded AI Career Boost with the aim to help more people, particularly women and minorities, people who are underrepresented in technology, get into AI tech leadership positions. And so I've been really focused on that. I offer courses that help people get the basics of AI and learn best practices around managing AI projects, how to manage successful projects. And then I also work with people one-on-one who are in AI roles and maybe feel like they need a little bit of a techie person in their corner, helping back them up, making sure they can really text their leverage in these positions by never feeling intimidated or that imposter syndrome that can sneak in when people start talking in tech words around us we don't understand. So it's been an exciting wild ride. I'm excited to continue with it. And I've been really blown away by the amazing community of folks I've had the opportunities to work with and see their projects, whether they were building something for their portfolio or they're building something in industry. So exciting times all around for AI.
And I know you've made such an incredible impact just from I've seen you do your classes, which you continue to do to kind of spread the word about what it means to be a product manager in AI. And of course, you do the coaching and just an amazing example of what it means to be honestly in this field, right? And one thing that you noticed, I think, as you were describing it, is there's so many more skills besides technical skills that you need in order to be effective in AI and specifically generative AI. Tell us
Yeah.
about what are those skills that you found that were impactful?
Yeah. So let's talk about tech and non-tech. So
Yeah.
first on the tech side, it's not like no tech skills are needed, but I find so many people feeling like they have to learn them like bottom up. They'll be like, I'm going to find out about this. They sign up for a webinar that's really meant for like developers. It's very low level. I know when I first started getting into AI, even as a programmer, it seemed like step one was learn to program. That's the very first step. And then you can start doing more. And that just isn't true anymore. And I really feel like there's ways to learn enough about the technology top down to be able to understand kind of the basics of the system architectures that are out there. If that intimidates you, it shouldn't. It's just lines and boxes, right? It's just how engineers communicate. Hey, how are we going to put this thing together, right? And really, there's some formalities that people use around it, but no one's that worried about being correct. They're more worried about communicating. Having that tech depth to be able to communicate and collaborate with your data science and engineering teams, that's really the line with technology and what you need. And I'd spoken to hundreds of hiring managers over the past 2 years. And every time they're like, start out with a position of, oh, I really need someone with like a CS degree or a PhD or some kind of like research back in data science. When I dig in, they end up admitting they're just looking for someone they know can collaborate with those people. They're looking for someone who can problem solve and dig in a little bit. And because they're not great at interviewing for that, they're using these degrees as a proxy, right?
Got it.
So it becomes this kind of paper ceiling that really shouldn't exist. And a lot of them don't realize how gendered that decision really is, right? Less than 25% of CS degrees go to women. Less than 12% of AI researchers are women. So this isn't just we have this problem in technology. Like, it is worse in AI than it
Mm.
was just in tech overall. And this is just such an important and impactful, you know, piece of the future economy, how the future world is getting built, that we really need to make sure that people understand what is that bar I need to get to on the technology side. But far more important than the technology side really was about getting people aligned around understanding risk. This is something that I feel like women and minorities are particularly suited for. Like, we're used to not being in the power position and having to get people aligned around us to get things done,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like, oh man, for once AI projects are something where someone could come up with the last minute in the middle of the night and be like, I just thought of this thing that could happen. And it sounds horrific and it sounds dangerous. And if you can't prove to me it won't happen, we can't launch this thing. There's so many AI projects that get kiboshed like this at the last minute, unless you've done such a good job of really deep diving on all the risks, thinking about which ones you're going to mitigate, which ones you're going to accept as a risk, but you have a contingency plan for, right? That's a really big part of this. Part of that too is understanding how these systems are going to impact people and different groups, whether that's your users or underrepresented minorities in that group,
Yeah.
through to the developers on your team, through to society, through to climate, and thinking about all those follow-on impacts of your system. These are things that naturally come to product managers, business managers who are used to thinking in this way. And the other piece is really getting data driven about your own expertise in a domain. Now that the technology is diffused, these LLMs are available on a widespread way to people for the fees you'll pay to OpenAI or Anthropic or Google. But the real differentiator is deeply knowing your market and your subject area. How do they work? Where do they work? How can we infuse this into their existing processes instead of trying to get people to change their behavior? So I feel like those traditional like product and business skills, those are the pieces that are now more valuable than ever. And with a little bit of tech depth, you can seize that opportunity to really seize the reins in AI projects.
Wow, I love how you've mapped this out. You make it sound so easy. I know it's not as easy as you make it
No.
sound, but you're really able to kind of break that complexity down into something that
Thank
someone
you.
can easily pick up and manage and kind of work through and get better at. And that's what it's all about, right? It's not starting like we're all learning at the same time. AI is
Exactly.
evolving at a rate that we haven't seen in the past. And we are all just trying to figure out how to make sense of all these developments as you look at, the AI, generative AI specifically, and all the models, everyone, the Llama announcement that just happened, I'm using Anthropic Cloud all the time. There's Perplexity letting you use any of these models. And I could spend all day just asking questions, right?
Yeah.
Until Claude shuts me down and says, okay, no more questions till
Yes.
7 p.m. You're done. Um, but
You
which
sound like
I'm like,
you're one of the people who's hitting that limit.
yeah, it always shuts me down. I'm asking too many questions. But what are you seeing kind of evolving from all of this? How can someone who's super interested in AI field wants to kind of hire you to help you through that? How can they continue to stay up to date on all these
Right.
things that are happening?
So staying up to date is one of the very biggest challenges. And I know so many people who are like, okay, I'm going to figure this out. And you just get overwhelmed. You do
Yeah,
get to a point where you're like, I'm sure a lot of us are reaching AI fatigue.
right.
Great. There's another model. I always
Exactly.
encourage people, especially if you're feeling that enthusiasm, you're in that enthusiastic stage, take that time to find a couple of key people that you really like to follow that are like presenting things with the context you need in the words you need, right? Because there's definitely some folks who are talking about AI who are talking to the tech crowd and the cutting edge folks. That may be you, but if it isn't, that's okay, right? So like there's definitely a lot of voices out there, but finding the one that resonates with you, you understand what they're talking about, they're breaking things down in terms you understand and care about for your role, like that's absolutely key, right?
Yeah.
And then I think as far as like getting started, it's crazy how I've repeated this from the beginning, and I'm so surprised how many people don't take this advice. Just get hands on. Be like Vicky and hit that question limit, right? Like get
Exactly.
curious.
Try it out.
Right? How many does it take to hit the question limit? I dare you to try,
Yeah.
right? But honestly, that can seem overwhelming too, right? So I've heard a really great, successful strategy is just saying like, I'm going to set 20 minutes aside a day that this is like doing the sit-ups in the morning or whatever. Use habit stacking. You do it with your morning coffee, whatever, right? Take 20 minutes of Instagram or TikTok scrolling and instead use it to actually think, like try it out and get hands-on. I'm so shocked to see the stats that for all the hundreds of millions of people who have tried ChatGPT, very, very few have come back and actually found it a sticky experience where they're using it all the time, right? And even with Perplexity, which is an interesting replacement to Google, different questions I find. Like if I'm looking for a factoid, fine, or a web page I know I need to find. But if I'm actually looking for an answer to a question that requires some research, Perplexity, with all its foibles around, you have to double check all the answers, really has provided a great alternative to that. I still default to Google, right? We're stuck in our patterns. So if you can find ways to break out of your existing patterns, to go and try a new tool, see if I wonder if ChatGPT can do X, right? It can be something in your personal life. I find, for instance, if I'm finding like a resistance, an emotional resistance to do anything, I want to RSVP to a party and I'm going to turn them down and I'm feeling awkward about it. I don't know what to say. So I'm resisting doing it. ChatGPT is great for that. Like, hey, tell them I just don't want to come, but make it sound really nice. So these are the first steps to getting fluent with where it's strong, where it's weak, and having it top of mind so that when you see a problem, you know if it's a good fit for AI and you can actually okay, I'm going to take this a step further, experiment, maybe build a proof of concept. Like this accessibility to the technology has never been so in our hands for people who can't program.
It is so I share your enthusiasm. I feel it. I'm hoping that this episode will inspire others to try it out too, right? Because exactly. I even say something to Claude and then I'll take the output and I'll actually create a new prompt for Perplexity and see what it comes up with. I run it through different models, like the pro level. I don't know. I just started experimenting with this, but what amazes me every time is the quality of the output. And and the other thing is that you can continue to have the same thread to kind of ask questions like, oh, I didn't think of that. You gave me this result, but I don't really like this and I really like that. What can we do with this? So it's that creative, it's almost, I use it as my creative co-pilot, I'm experimenting and asking questions and we're like, oh, and the ideas just keep flowing. So I don't always like the final response and I keep kind of meddling with it, I guess, to see what actually can come out of it.
And it'll give you ideas for how your users want to interact with the AI. Is it this sort of conversational flow where they keep adapting the output? Do they just want a one and done answer and you need to have really high accuracy and understand their intent really early? Do you know from them coming into your app, you have way more context about what they're trying to do and exactly how they're trying to do it. Maybe they don't need to provide all that context in a prompt anymore. And that's the value you provide, right?
Yeah.
But I think that getting hands on with it is that first step. And then even going farther, you just mentioned Perplexity. I love this idea of how these tools can help you understand even some of the more advanced things that are going on. In the tech circles I'm in, there's a lot of talk about agentic AI and having agents plan out, take a goal and plan out and break it down into steps for you. And that's what I love about Perplexity's Pro feature. You can do it, I think it's 5 times for free a day. I also run into the limit on that one.
I keep reaching the limit. They don't give you enough. I know.
Exactly. But if you put in a more complex or vague suggestion, it will break it down and show you the intermediate results. And it's so early. A lot of the agentic AI is so early and experimental. But I was like, oh, this is a great way to help explain agentic AI or help understand, get a mental model of agentic AI just by using that feature and seeing it.
Can you define agentic AI? What does it really mean?
It's so confusing because they keep overusing so many terms, right?
Yeah.
Because people have just been calling any, ChatGPT is an agent or whatever, like any AI is, they call that an agent. And then it's also a lot of the use cases people looked at early days were replacing customer service agents in the call center. So it was like, is that the agent? So that's why I think they've, instead of calling it agents, they called it agentic AI. And really this is more of a pattern where you can take on more ambiguous or complex problems because instead of just taking the problem and having an output, you will have usually a bunch of LLMs in concert actually saying, okay, what's the best way to accomplish this goal,
Mm.
right? So you
It's
might
like
just
the
put in a job.
orchestra. Everybody's playing their own instrument, and then the
That's
conductor
it.
brings it all together, right?
And you'll even have like one LLM that is the orchestrator, right? So
Yeah.
instead of you as a human kind of telling them all what to do, it's more of a system where they're like, okay, we have a planner, it comes up with the sub goals, and we have an executor, and it has access to external tools and
Yeah.
APIs that it can also call on, or maybe even like text to voice, and it could place phone calls and order you a pizza, right? Like these kinds of, interact with the real world scenarios.
Yeah.
But then you have another one that's responsible for double checking the answer or validating the answer. So you're getting a higher degree of accuracy. And so all of these different LLMs with different roles orchestrated together,
Mm.
those are the patterns that are emerging and being called agentic AI. And again, even within that, it's unclear if it's like the fact that it's tackling higher level ambiguous goals, the fact that there's this orchestration of multiple LLMs with different rules, or the fact that it can access external things
Yeah.
like APIs that makes it agentic. So I think we're going to get more clarity with the terms over the next few months.
We're
But so
completely
far, there's not a lot of.
shifting, right? The perception of the user interface. If you
Yeah.
think about it, there's going to be consolidation how the human interacts with technology,
Yeah.
because you might interact through voice, like, here's my receipt for my travel this week. And then essentially seeing that picture, your expenses get filed for you. You know how hard it is to file those
Hmm.
expenses and
Oh,
remember at the end of the month to turn them in. Here you go, like, here's my expense, file it by July whatever 26th. It's taken
exactly.
care of for you, creates the report, creates the,
And
follows
those
up
ones
on
where
it, right?
they have a different amount per night at each hotel and a different
Oh,
amount of
and the
tax.
taxes that you have to put in and the fees, like, that takes you
How much of our
forever,
economy is devoted to
right?
filling out
Talk
this
about
stupid
mileage
form?
to and from the airport. Calculate that for me. How many miles are you gonna submit for?
Exactly.
Like, all of those
Right.
things that used to take us time to, like, I would put it into Google Maps. It takes me 36 miles to
Yeah.
get to the airport, 20 cents a mile. I mean, it's just all of that work that's like so repetitive and non-creative can be taken on by that another agent that runs this query through Maps agent and says, okay, it's
Exactly.
36 miles to the airport from your house. Here's how much
Exactly.
your expense report is, right?
That's such a great analogy because I think if I were to like contextualize where our AI tools are right now,
Mm-hmm.
it's like you can do some of this, but you'd have to tell it, hey, I took this trip,
Yeah.
and hey, look it up on Google Maps how far it is, and then file it here. Like you'd have to provide all these like instructions
Directions.
and
Yeah.
break down. Whereas you're like, no, imagine I had access to my inbox and I just said, I took a trip in mid-August,
Right.
file the report, file the expense report,
Yeah.
and it has access to all of the APIs to do this. It can just look for all the receipts. It confirms with you, I found a hotel and an airplane, and that's it. Is there anything else? Good. Okay, it's filed. Amazing.
Exactly. Exactly. It's absolutely incredible and amazing, right? I mean, the things that are coming up are, I don't think we can even, it's so out of this world, like, so easy, right? You're like, okay, so I'm going to be sipping a margarita while somebody files my expense reports for me. I kind of like
Exactly.
that.
I'm into
But
it.
yeah, that's what agentic future is all about, and
Yeah.
APIs become so incredibly important to that. So do you see companies moving away from really focusing on that user experience? Because you and I would spend so much time figuring out where
Yeah.
each button had to be, how the user would interact with the flow. And now really all of that work from a user experience perspective is really in that custom personalized interaction, and the hard
Yeah.
work is between the systems. I have to file this expense report with Concur. I'm going to use API for Concur to do that. And then I have to send an email back to say I filed that report, so I'm going to use this API to do that. But the orchestration of that is done by something else, right?
Exactly. The hilarious part to me is that for years we were always pushing developers to like document your APIs, and it's so
Yeah,
important. It was always seen as this chore and like who is this even for? Now it's like it's the most important
it's
thing
the
that is
most
actually
important
like an
thing. You don't have software if you don't have APIs. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. Understandable, and I think there was always these efforts to like put the documentation in some form of standard so that machines could read it. And it's like, no, we've moved beyond that, right?
Yeah.
Now it's still, I feel like this is an area though that we're seeing things not move as quickly, right?
Mm.
So I feel like we've had such rapid progress for so long. We're seeing the first inklings of people asking like, hey, where are these agentic AI applications? Where is, I'm looking for, really want to stop filing my expense reports. Like, where is that app?
Yeah.
Right. And we're still finding they're grappling with this. And a lot of this is, I think, the combination of getting them reliable enough, but also that, yeah, we never put emphasis on the understandability of our API documentation, for
Yeah.
example, or even actually being able to do some of the things. A lot of folks don't understand that if there's not a public API to do something, you might not be able to
You're
do it.
not, you're kind of restricting yourself from the rest of the world in many ways,
Exactly.
because that's the, while we use language to communicate, systems use APIs to communicate.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And for good reasons. So some companies have not allowed certain functionality of their software to be accessible by APIs, right?
Yeah.
So just because you can imagine it doesn't mean these tools can automatically do it without some investment in the underlying boring old technology, right? Of just
Right, right.
the API
Well, that's
accessible,
where
right?
generative AI can help as well, from
Yeah.
a perspective of documentation, of making those APIs clear. I mean, you can now copy and paste that into Claude or Perplexity and say, hey, can you please document this API for me? Export it for me. Can you find anything that's inconclusive? I mean, how many times have you come across APIs that would overload a term? They would use
Oh, yeah.
employee here, but then they would use employee still in a completely different manner somewhere else.
Exactly.
And you're like, which employee do I use? Or in the second version, they don't call it an employee, they call it a customer. And you're like, wait,
Yeah,
where did the employee go? My whole
exactly.
integration is broken, right?
Exactly.
Um, so all of those things, I feel like we can really clean up some of that work, honestly, the technical debt, let's call it that, that we
Totally.
need to do in order to enable this agentic future.
Totally. I love that idea. And I feel like we're not seeing enough attention on this yet. That idea of like, we can use LLMs and like, what are the standards we should be using for
Yeah.
like, this is the base level of like understandability, not to a human, but to LLM systems. What are some things we can keep consistent that will help the LLM out and put less of a burden so that it has less of a chance of hallucinating, getting confused when it is kind of generating these hooks to hook into different APIs. Yeah.
Well,
Fascinating.
that's a company idea right there.
To say, should we publish this or should we just go start
Should
this
we just
company
go?
thing?
I think that's it. Stealth mode. We're doing this.
Like, we're the worst at launching stealth mode ever.
I know, right? The whole everybody can know this idea and it's around. I know.
Ideas are cheap. Execution is the hard
Execution
part.
is the tough part. And talk about execution. I feel like now everybody's saying, well, AI is just hype. We go like we talked about before for these summer hype cycles in AIs. Like
Yeah.
nobody's doing AI. There's no ROI in it. People are forgetting all about it. What is your perspective on that?
Oh, it's so interesting because, like you mentioned, it's a cycle. I remember these exact questions coming up last year around this time. And I feel like there's something in the news cycle that in the summer, they're like, oh, what's going to be the big thing in the fall? We've been talking about this thing for too long.
Right.
The fall of the big thing is going to be, like, let's talk about the trough of disillusionment. This cycle has been going on way longer than anyone would have predicted last year.
Yeah.
My frustration is that they're talking about these calls for ROI when really what I think they're like, where's the revenue? Right? They're
Right.
like, hey, where's the revenue? Where's the growth? Where's the jobs that you guys promised? Right?
Yeah.
Whereas a year ago, there were a lot of companies coming up to speed on this. They didn't necessarily have AI chops in house yet. How do I get started? And every single advisor on the planet was saying, start with some nice internal use cases that save you, that are efficiency gains.
Yeah.
Map your internal use cases, get more efficient. Guess what? They are, and they did. And the fact that they don't want to talk publicly about that is because they'd have to go into great detail about their internal processes. So
Mhm.
98% of the gains that we've seen, a lot of the folks have come from internal use cases. Guess what? That's what we told them to do. And it was a smart move if you're just
Yeah.
learning and trying to get your hands around the capabilities of this. Don't go launching something big and public and end up in the McDonald's situation where you have to take the thing off the market because it's not responding correctly to customers, right? Don't
Yeah.
disappoint your customers if you haven't tried it out internally yet. It all sorts of makes sense, right? So
Yeah.
I'm not surprised we haven't seen the public facing job creation use cases. I think those are coming. I think it does take some time just to get your hands around what it takes to deploy these at a scale that works, et cetera. Where it's very hard to build stuff that you're discovering as you go. Models from 6 months ago have been vastly outpaced by new models. Do you go back and rework everything as you go? So it's a lot of like infrastructure change within these companies to be able to iterate more quickly with these models. It's required. So they're
Mm.
kind of like rebuilding how they work. So the impatience
The
here, I get
impatience.
it, but I'm like, oh, I really hope this doesn't turn into kind of the like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Mhm.
Well, people are saying, hey, enough of us complained and the stakeholders started giving the CEOs a hard time when they've invested for the long term, right?
Yeah.
And
This
especially with
idea
learning.
of the long term, it's like
Yeah,
missing from a lot of planning right now. It's like, oh, if I could put something out there today and it doesn't
yeah,
generate me revenue tomorrow, I'm done. Right?
right. And they've invested, I understand they've invested billions and billions in
Yeah.
this. And then they're asking, like, what, okay, so where's my $1 billion use case? And it's like, well, internally, it actually comes from like 15, 20, 100 different use cases that we've made, micro improvements on,
Right.
right? Externally, I still think we'll see these big wins, but you need to actually have the capability across a bunch of people in your organization to understand the risks and be comfortable putting it out so you don't have internal
Yeah.
resistance. The other piece about it too is that these systems are learning systems. And
Mm.
so to get better, they actually need real feedback from humans. So some organizations have system feedback, but a lot don't. And so they're putting something out there. And I think it's almost like the McDonald's thing. The McDonald's didn't make a big announcement that they had this, right? It was kind of discovered that they had
Sure.
AI under the hood. I think a lot of them are saying, well, we're going to put something out there and start to gather the feedback from users while it's at this like early state before we can, before it's as good as it's going to get.
Mm.
So, as is commonly said about AI, the AIs we're getting out there, the worst ones we're ever going to see, right? And organizations are maybe like, hey, we're not proud of this yet, but we will after we've gotten some feedback and been able to vet the results. So they're not going out there and crowing publicly about things that could easily turn into these $1 billion use cases over time. They need time to adapt and learn and interact with the users, society, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it does take a lot of iteration. Even when I was working on my small SMEbot agent, what
Yeah,
I underestimated is how much work it takes to really integrate additional data, to continue to maintain it, to continue
right.
that it actually QA it consistently, that it
Yeah,
actually gives relevant information and doesn't hallucinate a lot. It
exactly.
every small use case does require a lot of effort at the end. It's not like, okay, I built something, I'm done, right?
Right. It's never done. It exists in a changing world. So how do you
Exactly.
keep updating its context? Again, that's something so many people forget when they're
It's
planning
like
this out.
raising a child. I mean, in my mind, it's like, okay, you're not done when it's like out of, walking around. Like you're continuing to
Yeah,
invest. You have to teach it new things. It's like
exactly.
it's
And everyone's
exposed to
like,
new complex information.
right, exactly. And everyone's like, it hasn't gotten a scholarship to Stanford yet. What's going on? Get with it.
Right, exactly. It's just out of diapers, like that. This is behind schedule, right? I mean, come on.
Yeah,
But that's how it is. AI is just getting out of diapers at this point. I mean, for lack of a better
yeah,
word. And now we're expecting it to run and be admitted to Stanford, and
exactly.
it just needs a little more hand holding to get them there. A few more
I
years,
like
you know, a
technology.
few more years.
Exactly. I know it's tough because I feel like every technology goes through this cycle where it's like while a bubble is bursting, there's
Yeah,
people who are like, no, you just need patience and we'll hang on, and there's people who are still, Web3 and crypto, it's coming back, but you lose the attention of like this big set of people who are in it
yeah,
for the short term. So that's what I'd say is I'm like, if there's a bubble that bursts, it's for people who thought this somehow this meant that like AI deploying live AI products was now free,
yeah,
cheap, like and just because that part of the group that gets disillusioned doesn't mean this still isn't enabling new use cases we could never do before, way cheaper, way easier. Prototyping things and testing new markets is now like 100 to 1,000 times easier than
yeah.
before. And that's one of those key skills I'm encouraging product managers to really take up the banner on. It's because I'm like, man, you've just been handed like this amazing set of tools. Don't let that pass you by.
Amazing, because you can iterate so quickly. I mean, we always did A/B testing, but you remember just to set that up, to do A/B testing, tracking the data on it, actually set up the user interface to make sure what percentage would see what, how to track that
It's
through the
so
process.
complex.
It was grueling, right? It would take months to
Exactly.
set up. And now you can
Exactly.
do that A/B testing, what, an hour, and you could have it
Right.
set up?
Depending on, I mean, you have to
Yeah, you
set
have
up
to
the
think it
infrastructure to
through.
do that,
Obviously,
right?
I'm kind of cutting out the
Yeah,
whole creativity, but if you know what A and B are, like,
exactly, right? To be able to mock up things
yeah,
now and even have it like act like that, right? Just will people choose A or B? It's absolutely phenomenal, and not have just a static image, but actually like a working page,
prototype.
right?
Yeah,
Something. Exactly. Exactly. So it's so true. There's so many terms like that that are easy to say. Just A/B test it. And you're like,
A/B testing. I know. I remember the pain of A/B testing. It's not as easy as it sounds. It's like sure, yeah,
yeah. Exactly. And that's a good analogy, right? That I think that a lot of this AI stuff, it's like, it's because it's simple to prototype. People are then expecting it to be simple to set up the infrastructure to A/B test if you've never done it before, right? Imagine not
right.
only like the first time you do something like A/B testing, you're thinking through all these problems for the first time, and you're building infrastructure so you can do it again in the future.
Mm.
I really think that's what a lot of companies are finding as they are doing AI, is they're trying to work out how many of these things are we going to have to do on an ongoing basis. Do we need to be able to regression test this every time a new better model comes out? Actually, yes.
Yeah,
Right? What does that look like? And so this learning as you go, I forgive everyone for it taking slightly longer than we anticipated.
yeah. I mean, the regression testing. It's so important, and it's so much more complex. I feel like that's the part that probably got a lot more complex than we used to think about,
Right. Yeah.
because it's really black box environment. I don't think you could truly regression test an LLM, just due to the complexity of how it does the calculations, and the number of use cases, right?
Right. And even just like the non-deterministic nature
Yeah.
means it just means you have to do it very differently. You're doing regression testing now on a statistical basis as
Mm,
opposed to doing it on a pure pass
right.
fail test basis, right? And I get asked about this in engineering circles. They're like, we used to do a bunch of smoke tests that unless when I put in
Yeah.
X, I get out Y. If that's not true, don't put this in production. And that no longer works for these LLM based systems unless you're, definitely engineering them into with guardrails and into a certain shape to do that, right? So
Yeah.
what do those regression tests look like? You're asking, us to rethink how software is made and which pieces we want to keep and which ones we want to update. Of course,
Mhm.
that's not going to be an overnight thing.
Yeah, because we're rethinking our entire software development process. Let's just be honest. Like,
Exactly.
it's something that has to be kind of recreated. I
Hmm.
know we kind of went from the waterfall to agile, but that was more of a project management
Yeah.
fixation than really rethinking about how you create products from the bottom up.
Yeah.
And I think with generative AI and just capabilities there, we're really rethinking the entire process in a
Yeah.
very different way.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, completely, completely. So I'm still really optimistic that like once we have more of these capabilities and more of this machinery,
Yeah.
that we're going to see some amazing use cases. And I see small ones coming out that are just like the last time I went to do a type form survey,
Yeah.
where instead of actually specifying, so it was like I have to set up a survey every time I want, much like the
Sure.
example of the expense report, right? It's
Yeah.
like what kind of question you want to ask, drop down, is it a short form or multiple choice, what are your multiple choice selections, right?
Sure.
And instead I'm doing an end of course survey. I want to ask about this, and this. And it just boom, like there was so much less clicking, right?
So much less.
And they've mapped text to a set of question types, and the things that they have available. I was just like, there's obviously so much value and time savings for an end user like me. I just think that's just a minuscule kind of look at the kind of opportunities. Never mind some of the bigger opportunities like translating content to multiple languages for multiple audiences at scale, and the
Oh
kinds
yeah.
of opportunities that opens
Oh,
up too.
you love those. I know I love those projects where we had to translate the website for and going international, right? I mean, I
Yeah,
remember the pain. How much pain was that? Like
exactly.
figuring
Totally.
out where they're coming from, then changing the
Yeah.
website. having the drop down, the amount of work required to just adjust the currency, something
Right.
as simple as the currency on the website was
Exactly.
humongous. And now it could be done with the click of a button.
Right. And those things that are pain points in the small, and we're like, hey, let's look at this as like this is an opportunity to save time when translating our website.
Right.
But it also means there are whole things we would have never considered doing before because they were such a gargantuan task. So the example there is Spotify took and translated its entire podcast library to multiple languages. And all of a sudden you're like, they have 100x their user base, they have 100x the exposure each of podcasters gets on there, they have 100x their playtime for
Yeah.
an ad surface,
We
right?
have a
So this is
family
a
plan on Spotify. My
right?
kids won't use
Yeah.
anything else. I'm like, we had to get a family plan. So
But
I'm
I'm pointing out like not all of the use cases are these time saving ones. There's still so much to be done there.
sure.
But that all of a sudden we're like, no, but when do we get to the revenue generation? When do we get to the growth?
Yeah.
They are out there. We're unlocking search in new ways. We're unlocking new audiences, whether it's translation or just finding new audiences for your existing content. Like there's so much that is there and has the potential that I'm just like, because it's taking organizations a little while to figure out how to operate in this new model, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater this fall when everyone says the AO bubble's bursting.
I'm not. I'm keeping with it. I'm keeping with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I know you're all in. I mean, we're starting this company.
Yeah, right.
So I
Yeah,
hope you
I'm
are.
hoping with this new company, Make Sparks, we're gonna figure something out. There's just so much potential with this that I've never honestly seen in the past in terms of tech and how
Yeah.
quickly it's evolving. The possibilities are endless, and I
Yeah.
know that people are not seeing revenue yet from a lot of these, but I really think it's because of that long-term potential
Yeah.
here.
I'm with
But
you.
long
I'm with
term
you.
is like 3 years. I mean, 2 to 3
Right.
years. It's not, we're not talking 10 years. We're not talking 15.
Exactly.
We can't even
Exactly.
imagine what's going to be possible in 3 years, which is very
Totally.
exciting.
And the hard part I do understand is that like with these agentic AI approaches coming, like
Yeah.
that's going to continue to advance. And it's like, will it outpace what we're doing? Do we just not need to develop software anymore? And we'll actually just say, act like a piece of software that can use whatever APIs you can find and go? Like,
Yeah.
will our jobs get simpler to the point that we don't need to invest in what you need to invest to get AI working today? I
I think
can't
it'll just
say.
be cheaper to find these applications because, right, SaaS was a big thing for many years, right? But to
Yeah.
build a good SaaS application took years and millions of dollars and
Yeah.
continued iteration. And I think we forget that, AI is similar. We're building on an existing infrastructure, but we'll still need to make that investment in order for us to kind of come up with that next thing.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So it'll be interesting to see who gets scared off. Like who was not in this for the long term, who was just dipping their toe in the water, hasn't seen revenue, maybe isn't convinced by the efficiency gain so far and pulls out of this investment game.
Yeah.
But who are the ones who are like, no, we always knew we were in it for the long term.
We'll see. We'll have to
We'll
have this,
see.
in a few months. Let's say 6 months from
Right.
now, we'll see what's happening because
Totally. I'm brave enough to come back to my own predictions, and if I was wrong, I'll own up to
I
it.
think that would be good. I think it's evolving so quickly that I think we'll find new things to talk about in 6 months that we didn't even think about today.
Yeah,
But Polly,
fantastic.
tell everyone about the training that you do, about your company. Where can they find you so they can catch up with you?
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. So I'm most active on LinkedIn. I have a newsletter both on LinkedIn and at my website, aicareerboost.com. If you go to aicareerboost.com/interested. So it really is the latest in what product managers and leaders need to know to be able to lead successful AI projects and the tech depth that they need, tech familiarity that they need to be great partners to their data science and engineering teams. I have a free masterclass that I do every month called the Path to AI Product Manager. So the next one is coming up on August 6th.
Nice.
But we have another one coming up in September. So it's an hour-long masterclass. It's absolutely free. We usually have between 800, 1,000 people tune in for this, where we're going over And I try to update it with some of the latest news or the latest insights coming out of industry, but really helping people understand what are the skills you need if you want to be part of the AI economy and building successful AI projects. What do you really need to get there, and what's that path look like? I also teach courses on Reforge. So we have a course coming up August 9th. It's generative AI, how to get from idea to MVP. So it's a 3 week course I teach with Rupa Chaturvedi, who's an amazing design leader. She was also at Alexa AI, at Google, at YouTube, and at Uber. But she's also worked at the Stanford Design Lab. So she teaches the design portion of the course, and I work more on the product and tech side to really give people the tools that they can take something they think is a good idea, understand what's a good framing for it as an AI project, and then what tools should I use if I want to make this real, turn this into a prototype. So that'll be kicking off August 9th.
You are super busy. I love it. All these opportunities to connect and take the classes. Highly recommend Polly and her
Fantastic.
team. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being on this with the chat about AI. It's always exciting to have you on, and I think we share a lot of similar interests, and I know that the audience also found this super
Oh,
helpful.
fantastic. Thank you so much, Vicki. I just love chatting with enthusiastic people about the space, and you're such a great example of that.
Thank
And
you.
and just seeing your experience, knowing being able to go into the depth you can. It's so great to be on here. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thanks.